The following lesson is linked to Learning Outcome 3. Writing and presenting. It addresses the assessment standard that requires learners to demonstrate planning skills for writing for a specific purpose, audience and context. We all have our favorite adverts. There are adverts that make us laugh, adverts that make us cry, adverts with catchy tunes, and adverts with memorable characters. Hi, I'm McFarlane Muleli. Which advert is your favorite? Have you ever wondered who comes up with the ideas for adverts and how they change or develop from being ideas to something that we see on TV or in a magazine? In this lesson, we will meet some people who create adverts to find out more about how adverts are developed. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the steps followed in developing an advertisement and define various terms used in the advertising industry. Adverts go through a long process from the initial idea to the final product we see on our TV screens or in newspapers. Because making an advert and showing it on TV or printing it in a magazine is an expensive process. An advert needs to be well thought out to give it the best chance of success. This means that a lot of effort goes into developing the idea for the advert and into thinking about how best to present it. One of the people who play a critical role in developing an advert is the art director. What does an art director do?
In any advertising agency, the creative teams generally, in fact nearly always, consist of art directors working with copywriters. An art director and a copywriter will work together to crack a concept. A concept comes from a brief that a client may give the agency to solve a problem they may have with a product or a service. The art director and the copywriter work together to come up with a solution which is called a concept. Once that concept has been created, the art director then concentrates on the art side, the pictures, if you like, of the advertisement or the TV commercial, while the copywriter concentrates on the words.
How are adverts developed?
A client will phone an advertising agency and say, I have a problem. I have a product I want to sell. I have a service I want to offer. I have a problem that I want to correct. He briefs what are known as the account directors or account executives of an agency, and they analyze his problem or his requirements, and they write a brief. The brief is then passed on to the creative team. The creative team have a look at the brief, and the brief will have all the facts, all the information, and perhaps a bit of marketing insight into what the problem or requirements are. They will sit and mull over the brief for a fair amount of time. They will start creating what is called the concept, the idea. How are you going to come to terms with the problem? How are you going to approach that problem in a way that cuts through the wallpaper? Because there's a huge amount of advertising out there. So really one of your real problems is how to stop people and get them to notice what it is you're telling them. You can only do that by being different, innovative, amusing, relevant, powerful. So the ideas will be thrown around. Out of those ideas will become one or two very single-minded, clear concepts. Those concepts hopefully will tie up with what the brief requires, but with a very personal, creative and different way of looking at it.
So, we've heard there's quite a long process involved in developing an ad. To make this process easier to follow, let's break it down into steps and look at a simple example. The first step happens even before the advertising agency is called in. It's called positioning. Positioning is what a business does when it decides what product it is going to sell or what service it's going to provide, what its target market is, what image it is going to portray to its customers, and what needs will be met by the product. As an example, think about a new cosmetics company. They may decide to position themselves as a company that makes perfumes aimed at a target market of teenage girls. They decide that the image they want to portray is that their fragrances are trendy yet affordable. They decide to position their product as a fragrance that meets the needs of smelling great and feeling good without spending a fortune. Once a company has worked out its position, it's ready for the second step. This involves developing a brief and giving it to an advertising agency. The brief outlines what kind of advert the company wants the advertising agency to develop, how much money they're prepared to spend, what message they want to send to the public, which target market they want to aim at, and what medium they want to use to send the message. In our example, the cosmetics company may say they want a print advert that will appear in magazines aimed at teenage girls such as 17, and that in the advert they want to tell teenage girls that their fragrances are trendy and affordable. The advertising agency takes the brief and then they develop the concept. Here, the advertising agency will come up with an idea for the advert that the client has briefed. They would suggest where and how an advert could be filmed in the case of a TV ad, or what pictures and text could be used in a print advert. They will also suggest a slogan that can be used. In our example, the advertising agency may come up with a concept that involves showing a photograph of a teenager standing outside a club and a slogan that reads, "The fragrance to wear whilst living life." The message that this would send would be that with this fragrance, you can smell good and still have money to do things. Once the concept has been developed, the advertising agency will pitch it to the client or the company that the advert is for. Pitching involves the advertising agency saying what their ideas for the advert are. The client will listen to the pitch and decide if they like the ideas or if they want something changed. In our example, the cosmetics company may think that the picture shows something that the target audience can relate to. However, they may say that they also want a picture of their fragrance included in the advert so that potential customers know what to look for. Once the ideas are accepted, the advert is ready for the final stage, production. At this point in the process, the advert is filmed or the pictures are taken and the artwork is created to make the advert ready for publication. So, in our example, the advertising agency would find a model, shoot the photo and get a designer to lay out the advert. Well, that is the basic process that adverts follow from coming up with the ideas to developing an advert that the public sees. But obviously, in real life, things are not quite so simple. We spoke to some more people who are involved in advertising and asked them to explain the different steps of creating an advert. First of all, we asked Mohalera Libitso, the marketing director of Liberty, what positioning means.
What products do we need to sell to whom and how do we communicate that, and how do we, what's called positioning, which is essentially to say, what does Liberty Life stand for and what can you expect from us in terms of the products that we're going to make available to you to meet your life requirements. We also have to look at not just products that are existing, but to say that what needs are not being met by the available products, and how do we ideally look into the making of new products, and also how do we find creative ways of getting from those products being available to them being delivered to the people who need them.
Now, you'll remember that positioning is the first step towards creating an advert and that it is followed by coming up with a brief. We spoke to Nigel Fox, a copywriter, about what a copywriter does and what a brief is.
Once the big idea for the advertisement has been created, then the art director and the copywriter split into their craft functions. So the copywriter then handles all the word side of all the media that the ad might appear in. Radio, television, print, street pole ads, anywhere that the advertisement's going to appear, the words will appear there, and the words have to be correct for that medium. So it's not just a case of being able to write, it's a case of knowing how to write for individual media, how to write for individual audiences, how to write for different kinds of products and services. It's a very involved function because you don't write for yourself. It's not like creative writing. You're writing for other people. You've got to write in the language that will appeal to a middle-aged woman or a kid or an old man with no money or something. You've got to be able to put yourself into that other person's point of view and write in a language that is meaningful to them. To come up with ideas for advertisements, first of all, you start with a brief, which has come from the client of a task that the advertising must do. It must sell something, it must communicate something. You read the brief, you absorb what the brief requires, you learn about the product, you learn about the target market.
So far, our experts have told us some more about the first two steps of developing an advert: positioning and developing a brief. Let's ask Nigel Fox to tell us more about how agencies come up with a concept.
You then bounce ideas around, brainstorming. So your art director and copywriter will sit together and they will just come up with an endless stream of ideas. They don't have to be right, you don't judge them at the time, you just come up with as many ideas as you can and keep that flow going until it starts to dry up. That can be a process of 2 or 3 days, or even more, it depends. Then you look at developing those ideas and say, would it work? Would it work in all the media that we have to use? Is it going to convey all the right messages? And you whittle that list down again. And you keep on distilling and distilling until maybe you finish up with 3 big ideas that can really work. And then normally the creative team would then talk to their creative director and say, look, we've got these ideas, which do you think is the most useful, the best idea, most creative? And with the creative director, you will then refine that until you come to the one big idea which you develop into TV scripts, storyboards, print ads, radio spots.
Okay, so now we've found out more about positioning, the brief, and the concept. Let's now ask Harry to tell us about the pitch and the final step of creating an advert: production.
Usually the ad is then put together in a rough form. It's usually sketched out or pieces of scrap art are used. The ad is put together but not created for real, is presented to the client. The client will either approve it with amendments, approve it with great enthusiasm, which is actually quite unusual, or reject it, at which stage you start the process all over again. But once that is approved, then if it's a press ad or a magazine ad, you select an artist who you may want to draw it, a cartoonist if it's a cartoon, a photographer if you need that kind of photograph. You select a production house, TV production house if it's TV, and the sort of director that you'd like to use if it's TV. You supervise via initial briefs on how it is you want the thing to look, to feel, to be noticed. You go through the process of production, i.e. you go to the photographers and he takes a photograph of whatever it is you want him to photograph. You go to a film shoot and stand behind the camera and see what's going on there. You go through the editing, you go through the production, and hopefully the ad will appear in the newspaper, on the TV, if it's copy on the radio, to everybody's satisfaction.
Well, now that we know how much thinking, planning and work goes into creating adverts, I'm sure we'll look at the adverts more closely when we see them. Let's recap the steps of the advertising process. The company first has to position itself. It then writes a brief for the advertising agency. The advertising agency creates a concept and pitches it to the company. The company either approves or rejects the pitched concept. If it is approved, the long process of production begins and ends with a finished advert in the chosen medium. To test your understanding of these steps and to put them into practice, it's time for the task. Now, get into groups of 4 or 5 learners and think of a product or service that appeals to you. Work out how you're going to position your product or service. Then pretend you're an advertising agency and brainstorm a concept for advertising your product or service. Finally, pitch your concept for an advert to the rest of your class. I hope you enjoyed learning about what goes into developing advertisements. Who knows, you may even like to find out more about making advertising your career. Join us next time as we analyze a TV advert in more detail.